Good afternoon, guys. Today we're going to talk about harmonic progression, about how chords move from one to another within the context of a key. So we're going to take each chord within our key and we're going to talk about what chord or chords they want to move to. Not only this, but we're also going to talk about why these chords want to move in these specific ways. So we've got major key chords on the outside, minor key chords in green in the brackets. And where better to start than chord 1? So chord 1 is our tonic chord. It's that feeling of home, that feeling of ultimate resolution. And as a result, any deviation away from chord 1 is going to bring about some sort of tension. So resultantly, chord 1 can go anywhere. Easiest one. It's a shame it's not all that simple. Now, music from other cultures might well just stay on one chord. You get entire pieces made up of just one chord. But we're not talking about the more meditative styles of music today. Today, we're talking about goal-directed music. Music which has a start point, veers off into other avenues, creating tension, then has an end point. We're talking about music from the Western classical tradition and all its derivatives. That is to say, pop, rock, jazz, you name it, it started here. So chord 2 really wants to move to chord 5. This is down to the circle of fifths. This is a circle of fifths progression. And just a word on the circle of fifths, I have many students who say to me, okay, I understand the theory of the circle of fifths, B, E, A, D, G, C, but I don't really understand how to use it in a practical way or in a musical way. And I always say, well, this is a really good way of doing that. Chord progressions, right? Because whenever we move to a chord that is a fifth below our starting point, we are moving to a really closely related chord. A lot of the musical data that is in any given chord is also present within the chord a fifth above. So when we have that movement of a fifth down, a fifth down, a fifth down, we get this feeling of resolution. It's very kind to our ear because of the relationship the two chords have on a fundamental level. So chord 2 really wants to move to chord 5 and can also move to chord 7, which is basically a revoicing of chord 5. So chord 3 is a bit of a weird one. You don't see chord 3 all that often. In minor keys, it's the relative major, so handle with care. And in major keys, it has a bit of an identity crisis. It doesn't really know what it's doing. Because two of the notes in the chord are the two most stable notes in the entire key, apart from the tonic itself. They're the third and the fifth of the tonic triad. So if we're in C major, there'd be E and G. But the fifth of the chord, B, is the most tense and most unstable note in the entire key. It's the leading note, which really wants to resolve. So chord 3 is kind of pushed in opposite directions. You don't see it that much, but when you do see it, it'll move stepwise to 4, and it'll also move through the circle of fifths to chord 6. So chord 4, our subdominant chord, a very strong chord in the key. It very often moves to chord 5, to chord 1 as part of that plagal cadence, the amen cadence, and we'll also see it move back a minor third to chord 2. Its role is very similar to chord 2 itself, but sometimes it'll add an extra link in the chain. Instead of going straight to 2, we'll go from 4 and then to 2, then to 5, then to 1. So very strong chord in the key. Really similar to chord 2 in that it really wants to move to chord 5. Chord 5, our dominant chord, and as such, it is basically the most important chord in the entire key, apart from our tonic chord itself. And above all else, that's where it wants to go. It really wants to move to chord 1. This is down to the circle of fifths that we were talking about earlier. And it's also down to some of the tendency tones within the chord itself. That leading note we were talking about earlier, the fifth of our 3 chord, is the third of chord 5, and that really wants to resolve to the root of chord 1, which would be C if we're in C major. You will see it move to other chords as well. You'll see it often move to chord 6, interrupted cadences, things like that. And that will still give you the resolution to the C and the E, but with a slight difference of colour. And you'll also see it move to chord 7, which is basically a revoicing of chord 5. So chord 6, our relative minor in a major key. It'll move a lot to chord 2 through the circle of fifths. That's something you see all the time. But you'll also see it move back a third to chord 4. Much like we did with chord 4 itself, we added that link in the chain. We went from 4, then to 2. We can do the same thing with 6. We can go from 6, then back, this time a major third, to chord 4. It's just a way of elongating that predominant or subdominant feel. So chord 7 is really similar to chord 5. It shares the same tendency tones as chord 5, and as such, it really wants to move to chord 1. Just to clarify, in minor keys, we're now talking about the 7 chord with the raised leading note. We're not talking about this chord here, which I'll get to later on. In major keys, you'll see chord 7 move through the circle of fifths to chord 3. Most of the time that circle of fifths progression starts from chord 3 onwards, but you do occasionally see it start on chord 7. What you don't really see, if we're to take that circle of fifths progression back an extra link in the chain, we land on chord 4, but we don't really ever see it start from chord 4 because there's an augmented fourth between chord 4 and chord 7. So really, when you take that circle of fifths progression back to its furthest point, it'll start from chord 7. You'll also see chord 7 move to chord 6 in the same way chord 5 moves to chord 6, and you'll see it move to chord 5 itself as pretty much a revoicing of the same chord. So now we're going to talk about the 7th chord in minor that doesn't use the raised leading note. Now this is very much handled with care, because when we use this chord in minor, we'll almost always take it through the circle of fifths to chord 3. But, I don't know if you remember what I was talking about earlier, chord 3 in minor is the relative major. So when we do use this progression, we'll almost always take it through the circle of fifths to chord 1, or at least to 6, because if we stop it here, it's just going to sound like modulation to the relative major. So there you have it. We've taken each chord from our key, and we have talked about what chord or chords they want to go to next. Okay. Gonna have to say it. This is not lapidary. These are not rules. These are just observations that we can use to our advantage. A lot of people get pretty silly about this and they start thinking, oh, if I learn this, it's gonna prevent me from doing certain things and I'll find it restrictive. And no, the music comes first, the theory explains it afterwards, right? Not to mention the fact that at the time these observations were being made, most of the composers were improvisational musicians. So, this is not how this information is supposed to be used. Composers veer away from this stuff all the time because composers like to play with our expectations. It's all part of the dance of tension and release. And what better way is there to create interesting music than playing with people's expectations? And learning this helps us to be able to do that. Those fundamental relationships that these individual notes have because of the acoustic series, we can then build out into chord progressions and further out into modulations. Cogs in cogs, right?